Gruesome new details this morning just made public in the murder case against the singer known as David.
Gigi joins us now with more on what prosecutors unveiled in this new court document right away. We just want to let you know these allegations are very disturbing.
They are, especially when you consider that she's basically a child, right? Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Prosecutors filed a brief yesterday with the evidence they say they have against singer David, whose real name, by the way, is David Burke. They detail what they describe as the horrifying steps that the singer took to dismember and then hide the body of his teenage girlfriend after they say he stabbed her to death last April. According to the document, which outlines evidence prosecutors plan to present, the singer-songwriter placed the teenager's body after killing her in a blue inflatable pool in his garage, and this was done to keep blood off the floor. And again, this is just an allegation, but it is very difficult to hear. The DA's office says he removed her limbs. He dismembered her with a chainsaw, one of two that he had ordered online. They also say he ordered a shovel, a cadaver bag, and other materials using a fake name, Victoria Mendez, and had them delivered to his Hollywood Hills home after the murder. They say he also ordered something called a burn cage. That's to burn evidence. The decomposed torso and head of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez were found in September inside a cadaver bag in the trunk of the Tesla that belongs to Burke. A plastic garbage bag was under the cadaver bag with her arms and legs. The prosecutors say her ring and pinky finger on her left hand, one of those fingers tattooed with Burke's name, were missing, and prosecutors say they were amputated by the singer and have never been found. The Tesla was towed to an impound lot where workers noticed a bad odor and called police. The brief also outlines a possible motive for murder. According to prosecutors, the singer wanted to silence Celeste after she threatened to go public with their relationship. Prosecutors say the pair had a sexual relationship that started when Celeste was only 13 years old, but they claim they had actually been involved since she was 11. Burke has pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder and other charges, and at his April 20th arraignment, David's lawyer said the evidence will actually prove that he did not murder Celeste. Certainly some very disturbing allegations.
Yeah, in those documents, it also showed that once her parents found out about this alleged relationship, they took her cell phone away, and that he had purchased a separate cell phone to get sent to her at her school. Text messages, a lot of the evidence here. What more do we know about that?
Well, they say that Celeste had been reported missing, and when she returned home, her parents took away her cell phone. So prosecutors claim that singer David paid $1,000 to a student at her junior high school to give her a burner phone, a cell phone that he had bought for her that her parents wouldn't know about, and that he went to all this trouble, and by that point they claim he knew she was a minor. Because she had been reported missing, and because parents thought she was in this relationship with David, they had sent the sheriff's department to do a welfare check.
Right. And
they told David, hey, she's, only 13 years old, and he said, oh, I had no idea. I thought she was over 18. And they say that the cell phone that he gave her was after he knew that she was a minor.
Wow. And so they're doing these like digital forensics now. They're combing through all the pictures. They even said that there was child pornography on this phone. Anything else that we know that they've discovered so far from all of that digital evidence?
The text messages, they are listed, some of them are listed in detail, and prosecutors say that the text messages discuss a possible pregnancy, a possible abortion, Plan B, that the many text messages are sexual in nature, and perhaps more importantly, they allege that they had an entire argument via text message where Celeste threatened to discover their relationship, to make it public.
That explains some of the charges too.
That's, they say, is the motive for murder.
Also, I'm curious, as elaborate as it was, all these steps that allegedly were taken to try to dispose of the body, like there are witnesses or other accomplices that might have also taken part in all of this, and so maybe this will all come as they continue the investigation.
The investigation is still very active. They're still looking for more evidence. And coming up later on Good Day LA, we'll talk a little bit about the Uber and the text messages that police say David sent to Celeste after she was already dead.
All right.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah. And all of it is disturbing.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
We are learning some more disturbing and I will just say incredibly gruesome details about the murder case against the singer David tonight. And this is thanks to a brief that was filed by Los Angeles Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman in connection with a status hearing earlier today. And I will warn you right now, some of what you're about to hear is very graphic. According to prosecutors, David, real name David Anthony Burke, allegedly used a chainsaw to dismember the body of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez after murdering her. He then allegedly amputated 2 fingers on her hand that could have linked him to the teen runaway, one that apparently had a tattoo of his name. Again, it's horrifying to hear. This 9-page brief that was obtained by TMZ lays out the evidence that Silverman planned to present at a preliminary hearing that was set for Friday, although today the defense said there was just too much discovery to go through by Friday, so the judge pushed that hearing back almost a month to May 26th. Again, that's where the prosecution ought to present enough evidence to say they can move forward with the case. Now, David was charged with first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, mutilating human remains earlier this month after the LAPD stormed this ritzy Hollywood Hills home that he had been staying at and arrested him. He's pleaded not guilty to all the charges. But the 21-year-old singer was at the top of everyone's suspect list after Celeste's badly decomposed body was found in the trunk of a Tesla reportedly registered to him last September. And in that brief that I mentioned before, prosecutors also claim they had evidence from surveillance videos and other sources that allegedly showed David was the last person to drive that car on July 29th. This is about a month before Celeste's body was found. Now, that could leave open the possibility that someone else moved the car afterwards. We're not entirely sure. But last week, Los Angeles District Attorney Nathan Hochman said that David killed Celeste because she threatened to expose the fact that he had been sexually abusing her, which could have been devastating for his music career. I mean, David was reportedly dropped from his label. And the brief also contains more information about that alleged relationship, including the allegation that Celeste was apparently just 11 years old when the pair met and just 13 when they allegedly started this sexual relationship. And as for today, the singer was in court. He was clean-shaven, quiet in court this afternoon, saying just 2 words, "Yes, ma'am," when asked if he agreed to the new date. And that glow up is thanks to the efforts of his attorneys, who asked the judge if their client could get a haircut, some dress clothes ahead of court. The judge agreed to the haircut, said no to the new duds, which is why David was wearing an orange prison jumpsuit today. And we can expect to see him back in court May 12th for a status hearing. But joining me now to dive into all this, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan, the host of Body Bags, missing persons private investigator Steve Fisher, who's been on this story from the very beginning. Great to have you both here. Steve, I'm going to start with you. So everybody knows you were hired by the owner of the home that David was reportedly renting. You were hired to investigate. You talked about a chainsaw months ago. You talked about finding a chainsaw months ago. Your reaction to this, does this confirm everything that you couldn't actually reveal at the time? Talk to us about it.
Yeah, it confirms some of it. You know, we didn't know everything. Let's be honest about that. But, you know, we did find a chainsaw. We found a burn cage, and we knew that they were ordered in the name of this Victoria Mendez. And we disclosed that it was, you know, in a fake name. And but we didn't know if that was a real person or not. However, all these things, and there was more things that were delivered to the house in that name, and we couldn't get past the chainsaw or the burn cage. Just there was no reasonable use to have it there. And now we find out that it does appear like, you know, they played a role.
Joseph, I don't know the better way to, I really don't know the best way to ask this, but can you explain what dismembering somebody with a chainsaw actually entails, cutting off someone's fingers? Because we are now have to believe, according to prosecutors, if these allegations are true, that a 20-year-old did this.
Yeah, I can break it down for you very succinctly. The fact that the RPMs that a chainsaw generates, which are thousands, it moves at a very high clip. And with that, chainsaw has teeth on it. It's not teeth like a regular handsaw. I've had a couple of cases involving chainsaws over the course of my career. And I'll just put it to you this way, the deposition of tissue and blood, because with a regular handsaw, you would just you might get a little tissue, you're gonna have a lot of blood. This is going to sling actual tissue everywhere. And so the idea that this could be cleaned up completely, there's no way under God's green heaven that you're going to be able to clean up every bit of tissue deposition that's there. You might think you've gotten it, but once the cops get in there and they have enough time, they're going to collect. And that goes back to this idea that they've identified DNA. And they're saying that it is her DNA.
And coupled with the pieces from the pool, right? The pool mat that allegedly he used to wrap her up?
Well, yeah, and they're talking about a kiddie pool that was there that facilitated this. And if you read that TMZ bit that they had, they're talking about he used this to guard the flow of blood. So, yeah, and if it is blue, they've got plastic embedded into these insults onto her body. And so it would be a matter of the criminalists, which also has indicated that they're examining these pieces. They've been able to tie back these fragments, which is very powerful stuff.
Steve, so much was made about this alleged relationship. You know, the brief says that Celeste was 11 years old when they first met, 13 years old when this sexual relationship began, that there was text messages between the two talking about Plan B, pregnancy, naked photos of Celeste, of her engaging in sexual activity. Is this in line with what you found?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, it's so sad. I mean, this girl, she'd been a teenager for 1 year, you know, and it's so hard to get past, like, how he could do how anybody could do this to anybody and ruin their life. But, you know, I want to say something real quick because I was going to call Joseph off the show too before. You know, we're really confused about this, what happened to this tissue and this blood marrow from the chainsaw, because they make it sound like there was trace amounts found, and they didn't really turn the house into a crime scene. They didn't hold it long when they did the search warrant. So it's really confusing us. It seems like a chainsaw would have absolutely created a horrific scene. But they don't speak about that. Well, so I still feel like there's a piece we're not getting.
About a piece we're not getting to this. We've always wondered if the allegations are true, did he have help? The brief claimed that David was the last to drive the Tesla in late July before Celeste's body was found. It didn't confirm, as far as I read, that doesn't mean someone else may have moved it. You tell me if I'm looking at it the wrong way. And then also they made the allegation that David lied to people about the smell in the trunk. So it seemed when I was reading this, it kind of moved away from the idea of him working with anyone else.
I mean, I guess it depends the way you read it. I still go back to the DA's statement that they're not taking off the table. Other people couldn't still be charged in this thing. I do think there was help. As far as the Tesla goes, the surveillance we have, I've always said that they probably have more surveillance than us. Surveillance we have, I do not believe that that's David is a light-skinned, long-haired person driving the car. I don't know what they have after that time, if David went to the car or something.
Or if they knew what was in the car. Or if they knew what was in the car. Because, look, that's another part. They talk about the body being in the car for quite some time. I still think it's a little confusing about where the remains were, when they were transported to the car. I mean, do you have a better idea?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think he stored them in the car. We heard from neighbors that the car started moving around the neighborhood starting in May. But you listen, it was nearby, and it was listen. I'm in search and rescue. I've dealt with a lot of deceased bodies. There's a very distinct smell that, especially if it was in the garage for a while. And that's where the other Tesla was being parked. It was going in and out of it. It was not being parked on the street, and they had like an arcade set up down there. I don't know how these people didn't know.
Look, this is an important day, right? I mean, it wasn't a preliminary hearing, but this document, 9 pages, provided so much information that we were all waiting for. We will see what happens next. Steve Fisher, Joseph Scott Morgan, thank you both for coming on to talk about the details of what is truly one of the worst cases I've heard in quite some time. Thank you both.
At first, the disappearance of Celeste Rivas Hernandez didn't immediately make headlines. To most people outside her circle, it was just another missing person report buried beneath the noise of everyday news. But for the people who knew her, the silence felt wrong almost instantly. Messages stopped going through, calls went unanswered, and the routines that once seemed predictable suddenly disappeared without explanation. Family members began retracing her last known movements, hoping there was a simple reason for her absence. But with every passing hour, that hope slowly turned into fear. Friends described her as someone who normally stayed connected, someone who wouldn't just vanish without saying anything. That's what made the situation feel so unsettling. The longer nobody heard from her, the more people began asking difficult questions. Social media posts started appearing online, asking if anyone had seen her, hoping someone somewhere had information that could explain where she went. At first, there was still optimism that she would eventually be found safe. But underneath that optimism was a growing sense that something serious had happened. As investigators quietly began looking into the case, one name slowly entered the conversation more often than others: David Anthony Burke. At that stage, it was only one lead among many, but detectives started noticing details that made them look closer. Timelines were compared, conversations were reviewed, and connections that once seemed unimportant suddenly carried new meaning. Still, nothing publicly suggested how dark the case would eventually become. To the outside world, it remained a mystery surrounded by uncertainty and unanswered questions. What makes stories like this so chilling is how ordinary everything appears before the truth begins surfacing. Neighbors continue their routines. Traffic moves normally. People laugh, work, and go about their day completely unaware that investigators are quietly piecing together something far more disturbing behind the scenes. In cases like this, the truth rarely arrives all at once. It reveals itself slowly, one detail at a time, until the full weight of the story becomes impossible to ignore. As detectives continued pulling at the loose threads surrounding Celeste's disappearance, they were about to uncover evidence that would completely change the direction of the investigation. Stay with me as we go deeper into this case, and don't forget to subscribe, because the next chapter reveals the moment investigators realized this was no longer just a missing person case. As investigators continued digging deeper into the disappearance of Celeste Rivas Hernandez, the case began shifting from uncertainty into something far more alarming. Detectives worked carefully through every possible lead, reviewing phone records, surveillance footage, and witness statements in an attempt to reconstruct her final known movements. What initially looked like scattered fragments of information slowly started forming a timeline. And within that timeline, one connection kept resurfacing: David Anthony Burke. At first, investigators approached the connection cautiously. In missing person cases, names often appear that ultimately lead nowhere. But as more evidence surfaced, detectives found themselves returning to the same questions repeatedly. Why were certain details inconsistent? Why did parts of the timeline no longer seem to match? Small contradictions that once seemed harmless suddenly carried much greater significance. The investigation intensified quietly behind the scenes, while the public remained largely unaware of how serious things were becoming. Meanwhile, concern online continued growing. Friends and supporters shared photos of Celeste across social media, hoping someone might recognize something or come forward with information. The emotional weight surrounding the case deepened as more people realized days had now turned into weeks without answers. Rumors also began spreading rapidly, with strangers online attempting to piece together theories from limited information. Some speculated recklessly, while others urged patience and respect for the investigation. Through all the noise, detectives remained focused on evidence rather than assumptions. As authorities tightened the timeline, they reportedly uncovered signs suggesting attempts may have been made to conceal what happened after Celeste disappeared. That discovery changed the tone of the investigation entirely. What had once been treated as a search for a missing teenager was now moving towards something far darker and far more disturbing. Detectives began examining locations, objects, and digital evidence with even greater urgency, understanding that every hour mattered. For the people following the case, the tension became impossible to ignore. Questions multiplied faster than answers, and with each new development, public interest exploded even further. If you've been following this story closely, take a moment to like and share the video, because the next chapter reveals the breakthrough that completely transformed the investigation and brought national attention to the case. The breakthrough came quietly, but the impact it had on the investigation was immediate and overwhelming. After weeks of searching for answers in the disappearance of Celeste Rivas Hernandez, investigators uncovered evidence that changed the case completely. What had once been approached as a missing person investigation was now being treated with a far greater level of urgency and seriousness. Detectives reportedly found indications that efforts may have been made to conceal the crime after Celeste's death, and that discovery sent shockwaves through both the investigation and the public following the story. Authorities began focusing heavily on reconstructing the timeline surrounding David Anthony Burke and his movements during the critical period investigators believe the crime occurred. Every detail mattered now. Detectives revisited witness statements, re-examined digital evidence, and carefully analyzed forensic findings in an effort to understand exactly what happened behind closed doors. According to reports tied to the case, investigators believe tools may have been used in attempts to dispose of or conceal evidence, a detail that added an especially disturbing layer to an already horrifying story. News of the allegations spread rapidly online, and public reaction intensified almost overnight. Social media became flooded with theories, reactions, and emotional responses from people struggling to process the seriousness of the accusations. Some believed the evidence already pointed clearly toward guilt, while others reminded people that the investigation was still unfolding and that every claim would ultimately need to be tested in court. The case had now become one of the most talked-about investigations in recent memory, drawing attention far beyond the local community. Despite the growing attention, investigators continued moving carefully. They understood the importance of building a case based on verifiable evidence rather than speculation. Every search, every interview, and every forensic analysis brought them closer to understanding the full picture. But many questions still remained unanswered. What exactly happened during Celeste's final hours? And how long had investigators been unknowingly standing near the truth before finally uncovering it? As pressure mounted from both the public and the media, authorities prepared for the next major step in the case, an arrest that would place David Anthony Burke directly at the center of national attention. If you're following this case closely, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the courtroom battle that followed would only make the story even more intense. When authorities finally arrested David Anthony Burke, the case entered an entirely new phase. For weeks, investigators had been quietly building what they believed was a strong timeline, supported by forensic evidence, digital records, and witness interviews. Now, with the arrest made public, the story exploded across news outlets and social media, drawing intense national attention. People who had followed the disappearance of Celeste Rivas Hernandez from the beginning suddenly found themselves watching a case that had transformed into a high-profile courtroom battle. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors began outlining their version of events, arguing that the evidence pointed toward deliberate actions taken to conceal the crime after Celeste's death. The allegations shocked many people following the case, especially as details about the investigation slowly became public. Prosecutors emphasized the significance of forensic findings and the timeline investigators had worked to reconstruct, presenting them as critical pieces in understanding what they believed happened. The atmosphere surrounding every hearing became tense, with reporters, observers, and supporters from both sides closely following every update. At the same time, Burke's defense team strongly denied the accusations, insisting that the public was rushing to conclusions before hearing all the facts. They challenged aspects of the investigation and argued that assumptions fueled by online speculation were shaping public opinion long before a trial had even begun. This created a divide among people following the story. Some believed the evidence appeared overwhelming, while others stressed the importance of allowing the legal process to unfold carefully and fairly. For Celeste's family, however, the courtroom proceedings were about far more than headlines or debate. Every appearance, every piece of testimony, and every mention of the case forced them to relive the emotional weight of the tragedy all over again. Supporters gathered outside court hearings, demanding justice, while also calling for respect and patience as the investigation continued. What made the situation even more unsettling was the realization that despite the arrest, many questions still remained unanswered. Investigators believed they had uncovered the truth, but the courtroom would ultimately become the place where every claim, every timeline, and every allegation would be tested publicly. If you've made it this far into the story, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe, because the final chapter explores the emotional aftermath of the case and the questions that still continue haunting everyone involved. As the case continued moving through the legal system, the story surrounding Celeste Rivas Hernandez became about more than just headlines and courtroom arguments. It became a painful reminder of how quickly ordinary lives can be shattered by tragedy. For her family, every new development carried emotional weight. Each hearing, each report, and each public discussion reopened wounds that had never fully healed. Behind all the media attention was the reality that a young life had been lost, leaving behind grief, unanswered questions, and a search for justice that still continues. At the center of the case remained David Anthony Burke, whose future would ultimately depend on what the courts decide after examining all available evidence. Prosecutors continued presenting their case, while the defense maintained that important questions remained unresolved. This ongoing battle created intense public debate, with many people forming strong opinions long before a final verdict could ever be reached. Some viewed the investigation as a clear path toward accountability, while others warned against allowing online speculation to replace the legal process. Beyond the courtroom, the story sparked wider conversations about trust, warning signs, and the hidden realities that sometimes exist beneath carefully controlled appearances. People began asking how situations like this can develop unnoticed, whether there were missed opportunities to intervene, and what lessons could be learned moving forward. Cases like this often leave communities searching not only for answers, but also for understanding, trying to make sense of something that feels impossible to fully explain. Even now, many questions continue lingering around the case. Investigators may believe they understand what happened, but until the legal process reaches its conclusion, uncertainty remains. That uncertainty is part of what keeps stories like this in public conversation for so long. People continue revisiting timelines, examining evidence, and trying to understand the moments that led to such devastating consequences. In the end, the story of Celeste is not just about a criminal investigation. It's about a life remembered by people who cared deeply for her, and a case that continues to leave a lasting impact on everyone who followed it. If this story made you think, reflect, or question how well we truly know the people around us, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe, because staying informed and paying attention to stories like this ensures they are never forgotten.